I don't think I've ever been on a stage with as many people whose work I have enjoyed and appreciated over the years. And for this we must thank the Goa Arts and Literary Festival, Nandini Sahai, our gracious hostess, Vivek Menezes and Damodar Mozo, Bhai, to all of us. Thank you, that's a nice round of applause which should be powered by your chicken sandwiches. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. It would be nice if you would all take your seats. You can bring your cups of tea and your sandwiches with you. No harm.
As long as the cups don't clatter on the saucers.
We worked a lot, we thought a lot about this evening and how we would structure it, because there's what you might call an embarras de richesse here. A lot of poets, a lot of poetry, a lot of excitement, many old friends coming together after many years, many generations of poets from Eunice D'Souza and Arvind Krishna Mehrotra all the way down to Sri Dallas Swami, down in the sense of generationally, if not Keki Daruwala as well. Many who will be reading in Goa for the first time, many who come back. But we thought actually after much deliberation that really what we need to do is trust the poem, trust the magic of words, to trust in the poet and his work, and to allow that to speak in a clear, untrammeled way, straight from the stage to your hearts. And so I'd like to invite all our poets on stage. Arvind Krishna Mehrotra, Eunice D'Souza, Keki Daruwala, Sri Dallas Swami, Chris Mooney Singh, Geev Patel, Ilona Yusuf, Manohar Shetty, Meena Kandasamy, Pundalik Naik. Raja, up your hands immediately or stay silent forever. No? Okay, that's wonderful. Wow, I think someone needs to take a photograph of this, for, just for the purposes of posterity. I think that's for the unseen guest, the poet who could not be here, the poem not yet written, or other such. Since we are in Goa, and the Goa Arts and Literary Festival has always been very sensitive to the issues of language, and to language both as a medium of interpenetration, of communication and of contestation, we thought that we would begin with the homeboy. So I'd like to invite Pundalik Naik to begin this evening's performance. I don't think Pundalik Naik needs any introduction to all of us seated here, but needs must. He was a teacher for 6 years between 1972 and 1978. He later took up directing Konkani plays for the stage. He joined All India Radio Panachi as sub-editor in 1979 and later assistant editor. He was a member of the Advisory Council for Official Language Cell Goa, vice president of the Goa Konkani Academy, member of the Advisory Committee of the Rights to Information Act, and president of Goa Konkani Academy. He was invited by the University of Pennsylvania for the C.R. Parekh Indian Creative Writer in Residence, Spring 2002. He received the Peters Australian Award for the play Shri Vichitrachi Zatra by Australian Academy of Broadcast and Science in 1988, the Gundu Sitaram Award in 1980, All India Doordarshan Award for Children's Programming, the Kala Academy Gomant Sharada Award for contribution in the Konkani literature 2010, the Sangeet Natak Academy Award 2013 among numerous others. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Punalik Naik.
I am requesting Dr. Kiran Gurkule. She will translate my poetry in English. खरो मनीस गावात वसला त्या महात्म्याची उतराही थोडो बदल करून हांव आयकता ती अशी खरो मनीस गावात वसला खरो भारत गावात वसला त्या महात्म्याची उतराही थोडो बदल करून हांव आयकता ती अशी खरो मनीस गावात वसला तेन्ना सावन म्हजी वार अशी गांवा कडेनूच पुरल्या हांव गांवांत जल्मलो वाडलो पोसलो आनी निमाणो पालवतलो तोवूय गांवांतूच तशें वाडट्या शाराचे ओडलायणी साद आनी आकर्शक नाद उणें नासले खरें म्हणल्यार गांवांत आतां आदलें कांयच उरूंक ना फातोडेर साद घालून गांवांक उठोवन घालपी कोंब्याची गंवठी कोणें काळान पिवळी पीठ आनी होवया सयत दाते गडगडून गेले काळाचे खोल खोल दोणी मुसळ आनी वायन घरांतले पडवीर आसतले म्हणून सांगपाक घराक पडवीच ना फाटल्या दिसांनी घरांत कसले तरी धार्मीक कार्य जाले जेवणा जाल्या उपरांत विधिशास्त्रा प्रमाण गायत्रीक वाडिल्ले पान दिवपाचें आसलें घराक अशी गोठोना म्हणून गायना माडा वयल्या रेंद्राची कातरां आयकून कविता स्फुरपी महाकवीची गजालूय आतां इतिहास जमा जाल्या पूण मुसळ आसा चानरच्या नाचांत आनी वायन चित्रबोध पुस्तकां तरा भासांचे दराचे सोना मसुरी मेरेन तांदूळ आसा कोंबो नासलो तरी लेयर आनी ब्रॉयलर आसा दाती नासली तरी प्लास्टीक पॅक पीठ आसा मीठ मीठ म्हणून साद नासलो तरी किलांनी मीठ आसा गायेक गांवा भायर धांवडायली तरी भायर सावन येवपी दुदाच्यो पोतयो आसा रेंदेर नासूं कातारां नासूं सोऱ्याच्यो बाटल्यो आसा आनी कातारांच्यो कॅसेटी नगाक नग आसा गांवाक गांव आसा गांव आतां बदलला गरजे भायर सुदारला आजयो काणयो विसरल्यात टीव्ही वयल्या सिरियलांनी घुसपल्यात नातराच्या हातान इलेक्ट्रॉनिक गेमी आजोन स्विकारल्या सक्तीची बेकारी ताका सरकारी पेन्शन माडार ना धालो बांदार ना कोलो पळयतकच दिसता गांव आतां सामको हाता भायर गेलो काल म्हजी आवय सोंपली चुटपुटे नाका सगळे ताकून बघून 100 हुप्पाक 4 पावलां आसतनाच निवडतली जुस्त तेन्ना हांव गांवा भायर म्हाका रकाद आयलो अमके वेळार मरण सांबाळून यो हांव गांवांत पावलो तेन्ना आवयच्या मरणाक धीर गंभीर पूण उत्सवाचें रूप सगळे अलिखीत संकेत आनी वावर कोण आंब्याचो खांदो कापता कोण लांकडां बेंडटा कोणाची किरवड आंगणात तयार जाता वयर मसणेक शिस्तबद्ध सरणाची रचणूक चल्ल्या ना धांवाधांव ना ताकतीक सगळे संथ गतीन जशे चलताले आवयचे वेव्हार सकाळ सांज मेरेन म्हाका एकल्याक रडपाक कारणूच ना कारण आवय कोणा एकल्याची मरूं ना सगळ्या गांवची आवय मेल्या त्या महात्म्याची उतरां थोडो बदल करून आजूय हांव आयकतां खरो मनीस गांवांत वचला थँक्यू
Your Excellency, eminent poets on stage, ladies and gentlemen, this is just an attempt at rendering the gist of the poem if possible. You all agree a poem cannot be really translated. The real human being dwells in the village. The real India lives in the villages. These are the words of that great soul, the Mahatma. With some transmutation, I hear them thus. The real human being dwells in the village. Then on, as the saying goes, my neonatal cord is thus buried in the village. Born and bred there, in a village I grew, and finally shall extinguish in the village too. For that matter, the enticing calls and the alluring sounds of the bulging city were not, after all, so few. Really speaking, now there is nothing left of the past in the village anymore. The cockerel, whose call at dawn awakened the village in the morn, has had its neck wrung by some dastardly hand. With the flower and the singing of OVs, the handmill has rolled away into the deep dungeon of time. Even to say that the pestle and the pounding pit used to be on the veranda like padvi, there isn't any padvi at all. A few days ago, there was some religious ritual in the house. After lunch, as per the customary rite, the meal served on a banana leaf for the divine Gayatri had to be offered to the cow, albeit symbolically. But there is no cowshed beside the house, and since there is no cowshed, there is no cow. The legend of our great Mahakavi, inspired by the Kantar of the reindeer, the toddy tapper, atop the coconut tree, has now become also a part of history. But the pestle is there in the folk dance of Shandor, and the pestle pit in the alphabet book is illustrated. A wide variety of rice and grades up to Sona Masuri are there too. There may be no cockerel, but there is the layer and the broiler. No handmill, but there is flour in polythene packs. The salt hawker's call of meat may be muted, but the kilos and kilos of salt are available in stacks. Though the cow has been driven out of the village, milk packets from elsewhere are a gift. There may be no toddy tapper, no kantar, but liquor bottles and cassettes of kantars are available, piece per piece, village for village. Now, the village has changed, developed beyond need. Grandmoms have forgotten their stories. Entrapped in television serials, grandchildren carry electronic games. Having accepted compulsory unemployment, grandpa gets government pension. On the village mand, there are no dhalo songs, no foxes, village embankments throng. It looks as though now the village has completely got out of hand. Yesterday, my mother passed away. No condolences wanted, having lived a full life with just 4 paces of a century. With just 4 paces short of a century, she breathed her last. Just at that juncture, away from the village, I received a message. Last rites at such and such a time. Take care and come. When I reached the village, mother's death had assumed a solemn but festive look. All unwritten conventions and activities. Someone cutting the branch of a mango tree. Somebody chopping firewood for slivers. The customary bamboo ladder in the front yard getting ready to be the buyer. High up on the cremation ground, a funeral pyre is systematically being set up. No rush, no commotion, everything at a measured pace. Just like mother's routine daily chores. For me alone to break into tears, there is absolutely no reason. For no single person's mother has died. The entire village has lost their mother. The words of the Mahatma, that great soul, with some alteration, even to this day I hear. The real human being dwells in the village. Thank you.
Thank you, both of you. I'd like to ask Ilona Yusuf now to read. Ilona Yusuf is a poet, printmaker and designer. Her poems have been published in book form, Picture This, and thereafter in literary journals in print and online, in Pakistan and abroad. She has written essays on Pakistani poetry in English and worked on editing projects, most recently as a guest editor for a special issue on poets from Pakistan, for the Canadian poetry journal Vellum. She freelances for several magazines, writing on art and literature. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ilona Yusuf.
The mechanics of hearing. Hammer, anvil, stirrup. 3 bones and a membrane sandwiched midway along a concealed tunnel. Minuscule bones working in the harmony of sequential movement strike the tympanum. Membrane stretched taut across a hollow body to receive a myriad chromatic inflections. Past the cone of light, in and out, back and forth, to and fro, the little hammer pushes waves past anvil and stirrup, past a forest of fiber swaying liquid in the labyrinth of chamber on spiral chamber. Inland sea sounding within a shell, filtering, translating kaleidoscopes of sound, so that amidst cacophony, a single clear note cuts through the air, filling it with pure sound. The mechanics of silence. And then there is erasure, a willful act, to close the ear to sounds it does not wish to perceive or hear, to rub away voice, to stiffen the amaranthine flexing of this assembly of moving parts, to dull the movement of hammer, anvil, stirrup against the tympanum, that it loses elasticity, that it idles untuned, that it unlearns the shape of words, the reading of sound, the exercise of speech, that it rubs away voice, that it ossifies in silence, overwhelmed. The next one is called Jalebi. Both of these poems are divided into 2 parts, the one I read just now and Jalebi. And although I don't usually write poems about politics, these are my take on the way people think. And Jalebi was written in response to all the political talk shows that we have in Pakistan, where everybody's screaming at each other, various politicians as well as television anchors. So this is Jalebi. So part 1. Oil fizzes at the edge of the glistening vat, crusted with blackened accumulations. The ustad drizzles his muslin full of orange batter. Slick-skilled doodles burned into his head by years of practice. Boiling, they rise to the surface, a maze of elaborately linked spirals, lifted in one effortless movement, and laid in a neighboring vat of fragrant, viscous syrup, then piled into a complex of crisp, brittle, sugarly lace, curlicues with empty centers, bordered by disconnected edges and abrupt dead ends. Part 2. This going around and around, drawing invisible webs, widening circles around the eye of truth, a once deliberate evasion of the clear and simple eye of clarity that's become reflex, like a dog coiled around himself in unremitting motion, spins to catch the tip of his tail, and draws an avid crowd. The next one is very different. I write a lot of poems about landscape, so this is Gravity. On nights when sleep eludes me, reminiscences whisper through the vast thickets of my elephant memory, cradling the halcyon isle of childhood, Tintern Abbey with its soaring roofless walls, dark woods and dappled light filtering through laced foliage, sudden bright heads of flowers gathered in moist fistfuls, cool mustiness of ground dressed in old browned leaves, echoing in the ferns and brackens of Himalayan slopes, but for the smells, one redolent of constant rain, the other prey to the passions of the elements, strong sun bringing pine sap to the surface, filling the air with its sharp, clean scent, the earthy balm of rain pelting dry ground, bringing mist and alpine flowers, gravities that knit together inextricably define me. The next one is Leave-Taking Arizona Patio. In the plain, on that journey of return, my tray carries a wedge of lemon garnishing a plate of salmon. And as I pick it up to squeeze it, flesh segmented and translucent, bursting with juice, the fragrance sharp as a blade with undertones almost of honey, like the blossom, hits my nostrils with the surety that this is a leave-taking. A lemon tree again, but never the awakening to its foliage in this house, in this place, where the arid clarity of light is so bright it almost hurts the eye. The blossoms blew in their sweetness on the March breeze, showering the patio with tiny petals. Have you looked at the flowers on the lemon tree? They are tiny, thick and white and waxy, the tips veined fragilely like tracery in pink, curling backward from the central crown to make a 5-point star. The last one is a long poem which I wrote in response to the movement of the IDPs when Swat was cleaned up, as they call it, from the Taliban in 2009. It's a very long poem, so I'll only read 2 sections, which are the first and the very last. So part 1. The onions were the last thing I laid on the dastarkhan. The bread in my daughter's hands dropped at the clamor of voices. Go, go, you have 10 minutes, or you will be caught in the crossfire. The campaign has begun. How can you think when soldiers trample through your home? Our house that outsiders never entered, the house that we rarely left. We ran to call our men. 2 hours away, we remembered the jewelry at the back of the cupboard, saved for our daughter's wedding. A year ago, my city-dwelling cousins said to me, pack a bag, keep it ready. I would smile at them, just like you. Don't smile, pack a bag. They are waiting, they will come. Remember, they lived among us for years. They and the soldiers went back and forth across the square where they flogged men and women, girls and boys, while people gathered to watch. The cousin we left behind to pick the plums we thought we might save said, I have tried to go out before dawn, but the firing never ends, and the fruit hangs rotting on the trees. How the valley must be filled with the stench of rotten fruit and corn that blackens on its stem. And this is the last part. There is no time, no place, only the ticking, the fixed eye of evil, beneath which people blink. The dead ground breeds guns and poppies, the fresh zeal of the unwashed, the unloved. The onions were the last thing I laid on the dastarkhan. The bread in my daughter's hands dropped at the clamor of voices. Go, go, you have 10 minutes, or you will be caught in the crossfire. The campaign has begun. Pack a bag, keep it ready with you. Remember, they lived among us for years. They and the soldiers went back and forth across the square where they flogged men and women, girls and boys, while people gathered to watch. How the valley must be filled with the stench of rotten fruit and corn that blackens on its stem. Thank you.
I'd like to ask Keki Daruwala to read next. Keki has been writing, he says, for 40 years. He published his first poetry in 1970 with the volume Under Orion. He has now 11 poetry volumes, including collected poems from Penguin in 2006 and selected poems which came out from the UK. His latest publication was the novel For Pepper and Christ, which was shortlisted for the Commonwealth Fiction Prize. Penguin India published his selected short stories under the title Love Across the Salt Desert. He won the Commonwealth Poetry Prize Asia in 1987 for his book Landscapes. Keki Daruwala.
I'm going to read from my book Fire Altar, poems on the Persians and the Greeks. There hasn't even been a launch of this book. It has just come out. And the first poem will be The Barbarians, because it is a riposte to the famous poem by Gaddafi called Waiting for the Barbarians. where the Roman senators wait and wait for the barbarians who were obviously Persians. Greece and Rome both fought with Persia. They were my ancestors. And this is a riposte. It was published in the Warwick Review, and I got calls from England. Are you also talking about the Saddam Hussein and the war against Saddam Hussein? Bush had launched his war. And I said, anything, if you've been writing poetry for 20 or 30 years, even if you're writing about the past, the contemporary shadow should or will fall on the poem. The barbarians. We are your barbarians, Constantine, the ones your roving spyglass curving across the Alexandrian skyline like a lighthouse beam looked out for. You scout the past, Nero told me, the Ionian gods, but your beam lit upon only our absence, the tide that never came in, the cavalry whose horse hooves had been stolen. In the end, you and your senators realized we weren't coming. Under the arcades, in the thickets of time, you lost us. While the West waited, we sailed eastwards towards Gujarat. It is not your fault that you call us barbarians, because you got the word as a hand-me-down from your ancestors. We see your point. You needed a dark hemisphere against your hemisphere of light, as you saw it. The dark was what you didn't understand, and it vanished like a continent that has broken away. We talked of the ongoing war between good and evil, and we rooted for the good. We sent the tribes back from the waters of Babylon to white-stoned Jerusalem. We adored fire and believed in one God, not that belief in one is necessarily superior to a belief in many. Our dispensation was fair between men and women, tribe and tribe, people and people. It is not that the barbarians won't be coming. The point, Kavafi, is there never were any barbarians. I'm going to read from the Pasargade sonnets, 3 sonnets and then 1 poem, or 4 sonnets. Pasargade is the capital of Cyrus. There is a tremendous tomb there in a huge plain called the Murghab plain, and Alexander is supposed to have come there and wept when he at the tomb, Cyrus the Great, and now you find hardly anything, just a small splinter on an entablature. That's all you find. And so it's more, these 9 sonnets are more on architecture and the unconscious than anything else. But I'll read just 3 or 4 from it. The first sonnet. The ground is not crisscrossed by water channels now. I went there at dawn, incidentally. The ground is not crisscrossed by water channels now. There is no thicket of saplings around the tomb, though across the road a thin-stemmed poplar grove flames in otters. There is no mosque dome, no bazaar, no kasbah, just one vast plain, and asleep on the skyline, python coils that sprawl, the low detritus of the Zagros range. It is difficult to conjure up an entrance hall from the bull's severed legs, which you cannot find, or let 2 piers dictate a profound perspective, a colonnade etched only on the mind. To make a skeleton out of some bone splinter, an imperial precinct out of fluting columns, an ice age out of one solitary winter. 2. Belief is not easy. Thank you. Belief is not easy here, never is. One hears the palace was a well-lit oblong, exquisitely proportioned. White limestone capitals rose from black plinths like a song. Walls finished in stucco you can conjure up, but not their paint in lapis lazuli blue or turquoise green. Their fade-outs disorient. History fades when the signposts are so few. Before I think of paint, I must think of walls, time crumbling, history fraying into mythos, while no mirror, no echo answers from the halls. Emptiness, space, I face a wall at last. I am no alchemist to make the great crossing from the dross of the present to the gold dust past. 3. One should have come here at sundown, when amber settles quietly on the Kodachrome, and the colors of silence sweep the plains of Murghab like those mineral-colored waterfowl that home in from salt inlets of the Gulf to the river here. Over wrinkled waters, dust fires would have blazed, all mirror fires burned twice. Gold light, gold leaf, turned to darkening damp at the crinkled edge of days. Tranquility, stillness, quiet, shadow tones, and edges too subtle for the eye. The touch of light on water is not the touch of light on stone. The poplar grove flames. Each leaf, it would seem, has a bronze side to its face. Not a cloud to stain this excess of quiet, excess of peace, excess of dream. And the last sonnet, and then one more poem, with Jerry's permission, of course, if you give it. This is the last sonnet in the Pasargade sonnets. I have Persepolis sonnets, etc. Nobody writes them anymore, incidentally. Okay. And this is Cyrus dying, and the last 2 lines were written on the grave, though now they are not visible at all. The words were ascetic, for they were yours. That means Cyrus's. I'm addressing Cyrus at the moment. The words were ascetic, for they were yours. The offerings were the courts, gems, robes of old, death, sensually abstemious, bone-dominated, reclining on a couch with legs of gold. The major guardhouse came up nearby, stacked with nasal hymns for the soul's good. To keep the fires going, a river of brown shoulders carried frankincense and logs of fragrant wood. I'm talking of slaves or whatever. And prayers smoked upwards, profoundly intoned by muffled, half-masked mobbeds who now and then, when flame turned ember, lapsed into a drone. Your words lay simple on the limestone face. Here I lie, Cyrus, king of the Persians. Stranger, don't grudge me these few feet of space. One more, can I? This is a narrative poem. The book is not about narrative poems, but this is one, and it's the boat to Delphi. And Croesus was about to go to war with Cyrus, and he sent a lion of gold, over 500 pounds, and a lot of gold to Delphi to ask, should he attack? And the answer was, if you attack, one great empire will fall. And it was his that fell. And when he sent another emissary that, look, I've been defeated, the oracle told him, when we told you one empire will fall, did you ever ask which one? The boat to Delphi. The Lydians, as they beach their boat, are greeted by a squall of gulls. They look for signs, the sky is dull. The wind drops as they disembark. A lonely buzzard overhead circles the sky in lazy arcs. The priestess spies him from her yard and feels the shadow on her back sluice and nimbus black. A scrabbling goat, a pebble rolls. She sees the angle of descent, the dust it kicks up as it falls, and knows who's here. She's after all Pythia, or Apollo's priestess, and knows who's here, breathes a whiff of coastal salt and coastal air, tidies her skirt, straightens her hair, awaits the Lydians as they come to reverently wait upon the Pythia's delirium. They pass a house, a mother darts to grab her infant as it cries, a snot-nosed babe a-crawl with flies, a goat strains at the rope, at last a clearing, a froth of flowers on a wave of grass. They reach the Delphic cave, fatigued. The gifts are laid out one by one, a trickle thick of precious stone illuminates a silver tray, carved ivory, salvers of gold, vases, urn, and amphorae. The envoy speaks, now that the Medes have fallen, Chaldea isn't far. We need someone to read the stars. Apollo, Croesus must conspire to obliterate the Persian hosts, the Magi and their cult of fire. Should we go to war? Should he go to war? Pythia, who felt beneath her feet the tides of coming events beat, and scrimmage in the shingle, sits on the tripod, throws back her head, closes her eyes, awaits her fits. The sacred bay leaf she is chewed, the sacred waters she is drunk, the vapors rise, the fevers come, she gyrates, contorts her frame, a voice that's readier than hers escapes her like a hissing flame. The stars are bright, the text is clear. Go back, old man, and tell your sire, if he attacks, a great empire will crumble. Look to your sides for Greek allies and forge your links. Her hissing suddenly subsides. Thank you.
Our next poet is Ramesh Veluskar. He is a poet of repute in Konkani. He has 8 collections of poetry published with different subjects. Mr. Veluskar, along with poetry, has written a lot of prose in the form of essays, travelogues, and literary appreciation. He was awarded the Sahitya Akademi Puraskar, the Kala Akademi Puraskar, the Padma Shri, B.B. Borkar Puraskar, the Goa State Cultural Award, and the Amrut Mahotsav Sanman Rashtrabhasha Prachar Samiti, Wardha 2013, among others. Ramesh Veluskar.
मैं कोंकणी में लिखता हूँ and sometimes I write in Hindi also. One Hindi poem I'm going to read first. वह लेटा था नदी के किनारे, एक पेड़ के नीचे देख रहा था बहते हुए पानी को, चहुं ओर छाई हुई प्राकृतिक सुषमा को सस्मित। एक आदमी जो शांति ढूंढ रहा था उसने उसे देखा, पेड़ के नीचे हंसते हुए पानी के स्रोत को देखते हुए नंगे बदन। आदमी ने उसे पूछा, महाराज आप शांति के सागर हैं, मुझे शांति चाहिए, मेरे पास सब कुछ है, बस शांति ही नहीं है, आप मुझे शांति दीजिएगा। उस पुरुष ने कहा, एक शर्त है। आदमी ने कहा, मान्य है। पुरुष ने कहा, पहले आप अपनी अशांति मुझे दीजिएगा। आदमी ने कहा, अशांति तो मेरी अपनी है, नितांत मेरी अपनी, कोई और आपको देने का कोई तरीका मेरे पास नहीं है। पुरुष ने उत्तर दिया, मेरे पास भी शांति बहुत है, पर आपको देने का कोई तरीका मेरे पास नहीं है। पर हाँ, यदि आपके पास इसे लेने का कोई तरीका है तो ले लीजिएगा, जितना चाहिए उतना ले लीजिएगा, मुझे कोई एतराज नहीं है। Now I'm reading some Konkani poems. Many times people speak about languages, they are dying. And Konkani being a very small language, people say that Konkani also is dying. And I don't know what is going to happen. People speak different languages nowadays everywhere in India, and they forget their own languages. This is a dukda hai. So we try to capture those things and keep it. We do not know. They may be mere pictures after some time, and they will be seen by the people in future. I don't know whether it is going to really die. I doubt that it should not die. Now, here there is a small poem on my mother, my granny. She was sick, and we were given a call. So we went to maternal granny, and we went to see her. So she was lying down, and then we came back after seeing her. After some days, another call was there. She was getting deteriorated, and it was very difficult for us to see her also. And then third time when we get called, she's no more. Now this situation was in my mind throughout, and from that there comes a poem. Pisoracha pakha, fly, a deer fly. Pisoracha pakha, uru naka, dolatla dukha, zulu naka. Pisoracha pakha, urun chal, dolatla dukha, zulu chal. And now, as Mr. Pundarik said, we are forgetting a number of things. Here are some poems on Shigmon and Fagun, Holi, and the rest of the poem now you will hear. Shamballo re baba shamballo, ghumtar thap ani shamali kiza, kasara kiza, paule re paulo, uballe re baba shamballo, soplo gulal ani git khanpat, kalban panchen churi megan, hatachu paplo, fankallo re baba shamballo, soplo bhag ani git khanpat, shigmet sopli patvira, burgelle re baba shamballo, ghumtar bullo shamballo, burga balak shamballo re baba shamballo, Santanen Dakshamballo, Suryapa Nakshamballo, Umarne Dakshamballo, Shamballo Baba Shamballo, Another poem on Shigmonli. Vade Rati Fagati Shig Myato Mel Ari Fagature Surgi Mog Mai Moga Phil Ani Sater Maya Khelo Ya Khelo Shigmya Mera Ani Chandra Valat Balu Reta Shigmya Cha Mera Ani Satri Surya Panu Dana Mana Cheho Dhanu Ani Sagarak Phula Lahu आनंदाचे बन आणि भडे राती मांडार गाती थपक थपक घुमटा आणि कलवंतांच्या डोळ्यातूनच किरा मोरा निमता आणि खाणपताक भारणारे तन राक थार आणि सातेर माया आनंदानं भर घर दार आता येता गबाजात येता भजी माया आणि मजान राती चोया तिच्या शृंगाराची सया देवाचे आनंदी झाला हो देवाचे आनंदी झाला हो देवाचे आनंदी झाला.
Our next poet is Meena Kandasamy. Meena has just asked me not to read out the biodata and to say Meena Kandasamy is a poet. So there you go, Meena Kandasamy. I'm saying Meena Kandasamy is a poet.
I'll be reading a couple of my own poems, 2 or 3, and then I'll read my translations from the Tirukkural, which I think I'm reading in public for the first time. These are my poems. Backstreet Girls, dedicated to the moral police. This woman, she's the slut, and that girl over there, she is the glutton, and I'm a bitch with tattoos on my lusty thighs. This dark lady has taught me in her speech that one strikes gold as part-time witch, and I'm a shrew with summers in my name. Tongues untied, we swallow songs, sure as sluts, we strip random men, sleepless, there's stardust on our lids, naked, there's self-love on our minds, and yes, my dears, we are all friends. There will be no blood on our bridal beds. We are not the ones you will choose for wives. We are not the ones you can sentence for life. This is slightly on the theme of marriage. There's another poem. I'm speaking with a lot of experience. Scrutiny for an affair. Trust any man who is allergic to children, carries a civil war in his eyes, travels a lot, and speaks up when you're subjected to society's customary stone throwing. This hero has a history of scandals. He keeps secrets like slave girls. Trust this man to never let you down or stand you up, even if it involves rising from the dead. Amen. For marriage, trust a man only after you have dunked his head in buckets of freezing water. Trust all the truth spilling out of him when you have slipped like soap on skin, rusty pins under his toenails, eyes wide open. Trust him as you take him on an electric dance that makes his penis sing. Test him to trust him, detest him to trust him. Trust a man through faith in all forms of torture, which is how men trust one another. And this is one poem which is part of why I just quit academia and decided poetry is going to be my game. Once my silence held you spellbound. You would not discuss me because my suffering was not theoretical enough. Enough. Now I am theoretical enough. I am theatrical enough. I have learned all these big words. I can use them with abandon. I can misuse them. I can refuse them. I can throw them about. And one day I can throw them out. I am the renegade who can drop these multi-syllable monsters for studied stylistic effect. I am the rebel who can drop them all together. I invent new ones every passing day. And for your information, Oxford English Dictionary consults me. Roget's Thesaurus finds it difficult to stay updated. But because I use these bedeviling words the way you use me does not mean that I have stopped seething in anger. It does not mean that I have stopped swearing. This is like the last of my poems. One was written, I normally don't write immediately and I'm unable to do that, but one was written on the day Jyoti died, the December 6th rape victim, and it's called Sangharsh Karna Hai, which I think were her last words. Hear the hurried truth, day after day after day of battling death and keeping him at bay. You became the star taking struggle in her stride, and we became the body breaking free. We became the scream cutting loose from the curse of silence. We became the protest that poured like blood from a wounded knight, and learning from you, we became the flesh that became the fight. The last of my poems, and after that I'm going to go back to the translations. This is called Martyr. A militant whom my lines cannot hold, whom my lips cannot kiss, whom my eyes cannot hide, whom my memory cannot mark with a day of birth or even death. No knowledge of her village laid waste, then displaced, and no mention of her songs seeking to seize a state, and no sign of a red star where she had stashed her dreams. In this book of martyrs, only that blood-drenched story in 3 bold words. One woman comrade to say that she died fighting for her people. Now, within 5 minutes, I'll finish this Kural translations as well. The Tirukkural is a 2,000-year-old or possibly even older Tamil book. which for some reason has never been translated by women, and it's often seen as this book of, moral values, seen as very didactic, and it's seen as, very spiritual, and for that reason you only have, the Christian missionary types of the 19th, 20th century, or the Hindu missionary types selecting it. So I decided, why don't I translate? And the Quran is basically a kind of metrical verse. It consists of only 7 words in a couplet form, and so putting it into English was fun. And also because, like words like sex would never be used in the other translations. They would just say embrace or hug, or they would use the word union, which I would think of trade union, but of course they're talking about they're talking about some other kind of union. So here's the Tirukkural finally liberated. And the first one is actually, I think, dedicated to Sridala because she suits it. Is there anybody Tamil in the audience? Any Tamils? Okay. Yeah, one Tamil, okay. It's Anangakol Aimail Kollo Kanangule Madarkul Malumin Nenji. And in English, my heart is tossed about. Is she the lusty she-devil, a flamboyant peacock, lady of heavy earrings? Once I never knew of that which is called death. Now I know it wages war with a woman's striking eyes. I don't know if Tamils are bad in bed or why they came up with this, but this is the Quran. A little stolen glance is so much more than so much sex. I don't know which way to read it. Maybe you can read it romantically, or you can just decide these fuckers are no use in bed. Only the eyes of lovers knows how to glance the open glance of strangers. And this one. Quarrel, reconcile, have sex. These the lovers' rewards. And because Tamils are also prone to exaggeration. Anicham, delicate flower, drooping upon touch or breath, and even swan feathers are to her feet cactus thorns. And then, because inside these eyes my lover resides, and because I know the hidden is stolen, I do not even write my eyes. Worried that no one knows of its existence, my desire defends itself by taking to the streets. And this is something nice. Give up desire or give up shame, good heart, I cannot suffer both of them. Hoping in his defense that he will show love, my heart is a fool that follows the man who left me. This sly enchanter and his artful words, are they not the army that breaks into our womanness? And this is actually my favorite. She begs with her eyes, which speak of how she aches for sex. It is said then, the woman is being womanly. Like drink that reduces the drunk into objects of ridicule, so does the chest of this charmer. Having seen how his heart goes along with him, dear heart, whose are you when you don't get along with me? And this is classic Tamil woman symptom, especially my mom personifies all the last three. The 3 I'm going to read. Everyone with womanhood publicly feast their eyes, but I will not embrace your debauched chest. When she said I loved her more than anyone else, she sulked, asking, then whom, then whom? I said, in this birth we are inseparable. Tears welled up in her eyes. And the last 2, of course, is my kind of poem. In a lover's quarrel, the loser wins, and this truth is seen in the sex. The last one, and then I'll get rid of myself from here. Sex takes delight in sulking, which in turn delights in getting sex. Thank you.
Our next poet is Chris Mooney Singh. Chris Mooney Singh's latest collection is The Bearded Chameleon. His fiction has appeared in numerous Southeast Asian anthologies, and his short plays have been staged in Singapore, where he has established 2 full-time literary arts organizations during the past decade. Chris Mooney Singh.
My life pivots between three countries: Australia, my birthplace; Singapore, my place of marriage and work; and India, my spiritual homeland. And I'm going to try to encompass that infinity track of journeys that I continually seem to be on via Emirates, Singapore Airlines, and other, winged birds. I was born in the suburbs in Canberra. This is a poem called The Iron Tree. In the backyards of most Australian suburban homes, you have what we call the Hills Hoist. I don't know whether you know what it means. It's a rotary place where Mum hangs out the clothes to dry. The Hills Hoist, and this is called The Iron Tree. The halfway house to heaven is a tree house. I always had the burning need to climb, but out front, the golden maples were all pruned too high. My only ladder was the Hills Hoist. Mum would peg, then winch up my wet jocks, pants and shirts until all waved like frantic semaphore. I'd sit outside each night, their bubble of cold war, no talk. They were buried in Reader's Digest, sipping carnation milk in coffee with dead butts in their ashtrays, parents leaning back in armchairs like astronauts on separate missions in a launch pad living room, while I went out to climb the silver limbs of the iron tree. An aspiring dervish, spinning its four-cornered hat of rust and squeaks. I would then Errol Flynn from its yard arm and swing and turn until giddy with transcendence. Then, one day, Dad strung up 7 spinning chickens on the wires, blood draining to their heads, less messy than a chopping block with headless ghosts running about amok. The dance macabre haunted me in bed asleep, as if I too was strung up, squawking in a vortex, choking out the last mechanical clucks like a torture victim dragged from a helicopter crash somewhere in the Vietnam War. The Hills Hoist radared help across the badlands of the backyards, from hoist to hoist. Then it was over. My childhood searching for the magus of a tree to view the milky star fields of the night above the corrugated roofs. Instead, there was only this galvanic lightning rod calling down the maelstrom of wrong paths, pain, and more bankruptcy, and I was left with only some philosophy of whirly-gig utility to launch myself, an upbringing that was stuck here with some bent and wonky leaning tower of iron that was strung up with dangerous flashing lights at Christmas time. That was childhood. Thank you. Out of grimness come better things. Singapore is a place where I spent the last decade. Previous to that, I'm working backwards because I spent many years in India, so I'm going to leave India to end on. This poem comes from a collection called The Laughing Buddha Cab Company, because Singapore is a country of 25,000 taxis. It's a small island, a little like a city-state like Goa, and taxis running everywhere. This poem is not about a taxi, though. It's about somebody waiting for a cab at a bus stand, or a taxi stand, sorry. And Singapore is basically an Asian country with a dominant Chinese population. Singapore itself, of course, comes from the Sanskrit Singa, meaning lion, and it's the lion city. And in Singapore, we also have the Chinese lion dance. Okay, so this is a poem about somebody sitting on the, waiting for a cab, with the head of the lion dance. It's a 2-part dance with 2 people one on the bottom, one on the top, the head and the bottom part. So this is the guy who was the head of the lion dance troupe, waiting for a taxi. He is seated, waiting, a lion at the cab stand, the empty head beside him. So fluffy eyebrows, ears, not fierce at all, and cute as a giant Pekingese. His whole troupe's gone. Their banging drums packed and cymbals that scare ghosts. He missed the pickup truck that drove off under stars and waits here for a cab. This is a part-time job. He's an on-call lion and will leap up for a fee at spirits that might scare your food hall launch, a conference or trade show. He is the brains up front, now parted from the body, yet quite a sitting duck for the roving eyes of skeptics passing by like ghosts who ignore the ancient ways. The yellow pants partner hidden under sequins who holds on from behind was his crouching tiger who shouldered him right up the stilted on-stage platforms or moved fast with his compass to the left or to the right as cymbals clashed their brass. The body part has gone, leaving him half a lion, unmagical on a bench. Wheel her through swing doors, banging like a poltergeist. The irritated doctor in a white coat says, "Why you came so late?" "Too bad, sorry." The taxi is a ticking bomb of commitments. Having brought a woman who gasped like a dove, Narayan, the driver, won't take any cab fare as 7 crows dance with their hospital roses and minor birds stand around like grave diggers and black flies play tag above the power lines and ring road traffic has no time for time at 8 in the morning, at 8 o'clock in the morning. The clerk says, name, age, passport number. The attendants are ripping off a wedding ring, a bangle, a steel watch, a shawl. They are cutting her dress down the middle with shears. You see through a slit in the curtains at the shock of 8 in the morning. The crisp sheet is pulled over tight. She is dehydration on wheels, rattling to the morgue as visitors attend their own rude endings. And now you know with headache clarity that you are alone, and again alone. Her dove soft spirit flying up has left you for some other place, somewhere where it is forever 8 o'clock in the morning. You cannot leave the big house of chemicals, this absurdity of roses outside the window, cracked cups of chai, the banging of nerves, and you can't wash the cast of Foreigner from your hands. The in-triplicate subcontinent red tape days, you, the machine of man tears working overtime as the wall clock keeps on shouting and shouting at 8 in the morning, at 8 in the morning, at 8 in the period of your morning. The conference has been exploring the theme of belonging, so I would like to read or sing to you an attempt at an English ghazal called Belonging. Absurd this cage, absurd this cage, so where do we belong? Absurd this cage, so where do we belong? In peach-faced lovebird heaven we belong. In peach-faced lovebird heaven we belong. The backshed father beatings bred us strong. The backshed father beatings bred us strong. Is sin transferred Don't let your rage belong. Don't let your rage belong. Another Airbus sings above the sea. Another Airbus sings above the sea. The silver bird sends travelers to belong, to belong. A crimson-breasted parrot quits the branch. A crimson-breasted parrot quits the branch. It overheard this longing to belong, this longing to belong. A time must come when crisis takes the axe. A time must come when crisis takes the axe and hacks the absurd neck that can't belong, that can't belong. Now stare with hope at trees beyond the bars. Now stare with hope at trees beyond the bars. At where you and she and the bird on the branch belong, belong. This guzzle cage locks up its lyrebirds. This guzzle cage locks up its lyrebirds. Word by word, break out, bonehead. Belong, belong, belong. Thank you very much.
Our next poet is Dr. Rajay Pawar. He has done his PhD in Konkani, the first ever doctoral study on Konkani poetry. He has written several books and has won several literary awards. He was awarded the Sahitya Puraskar 2009 by the Bharatiya Bhasha Parishad and the Kavita Puraskar 2012 by Kavita Trust, Mangalore, for his contribution in the field of Konkani poetry. Dr. Rajay Pawar.
I'm going to recite two of my Konkani poems. I myself has translated it in Konkani. Of course, it's just a literal translation, literary translation. I'll first read out translation and then move on to my original in Konkani so that you can enjoy my Konkani flavor also. My first poem is Darwin and Man's Tale. We all know about the theory of evolution by Darwin. Darwin, I wonder how you could be so wrong. Darwin, I wonder how you could be so wrong. You know, our tail just has never fallen off. Those climbing the success ladder are pulled down by their tails. Often their tails are a means to overreach ourselves. How then did you miss seeing this prehensile tail? You know, our tail, it hasn't fallen off. Jumping onto any branch, it's our pride and joy. Like the scorpion, we too sting poison where need be. This multifaceted tail, none have it except we. You know, our tail, it hasn't fallen off. Livid, the cat-like tail unfurled, ready to jump on. Likewise, changed situations, we turn tail and run. How did your scientist's eye overlook this tail of ours? You know, our tail, it hasn't fallen off. When drooling with greed, it beautifully. It's our tail that makes the world go round. I think that your eye missed the metaphoric link. You know, our tail, it hasn't fallen off. In the last para, more poisonous than the scorpion, even more curved than the dog. You will never find it elsewhere, this rate of the human tail. Have you understood Darwin? Have you understood Darwin? We have lost our shame. We have lost our shame, but not our tail. You know, our tail, it hasn't fallen off. And I'll read it in Konkani. Darwin आणि मनशाची शेपडी. डार्विना तुझें चुकलें कशें म्हाकाय कळूंक ना, डार्विना तुझें चुकलें कशें म्हाकाय कळूंक ना, आसा तशी आसा आमची शेपडी गळूंक ना. वयर चडटल्यांचे आमी शेपडेक धरून ओडटात, वयर चडटल्यांचे आमी शेपडेक धरून ओडटात, केन्ना तांचेच शेपडेक धरून आमी वयर चडटात. कशी रे तुका आमची ही शेपडी दिसूंक ना, आसा तशी आसा आमची शेपडी गळूंक ना. खंयचे खानयेर मारून उडी आमी शेपडी मिरयतात, खंयचे खानयेर मारून उडी आमी शेपडी मिरयतात आनी विचवा भशेन शेपडी मारून वीख किरयतात. भोवरंगी शेपडी अशी कोणाक मेळूंक ना, आसा तशी आसा आमची शेपडी गळूंक ना. माजरा भशेन शेपडी फुलोवन आमकां आंगार वचूंक कळटा, माजरा भशेन शेपडी फुलोवन आमकां आंगार वचूंक कळटा, तसोच वेळ आयल्यार शेपडी भितर घालून पळयटा. नदरेक तुज्या शेपडी आमची कशी रे मेळूंक ना, आसा तशी आसा आमची शेपडी गळूंक ना. लेवटेपणा करतना ती काय बरी हालता, लेवटेपणा करतना ती काय बरी हालता. ह्या शेपडेचेरूच मनशाचें जग मरे चलता. म्हाका दिसता तुवेंच तिका सारकी तेळूंक ना, आसा तशी आसा आमची शेपडी गळूंक ना. विचवा परस विखारी आनी सुण्या परस वाकडी, विचवा परस विखारी आनी सुण्या परस वाकडी. तुका खंयच मेळची ना रे मनशा सारकी शेपडी. कळ्ळें मरे डार्विना, कळ्ळें मरे डार्विना. लज लेगीत सोडल्या आमी, पूण शेपडी सोडूंक ना, आसा तशी आसा आमची शेपडी गळूंक ना, आसा तशी आसा आमची शेपडी गळूंक ना. थँक्यू. My second poem, I'll first read it out in English. Village soil. He with his children came from America to his village for the first time. They saw the village for the first time. He with his children came from America to this village, to his village for the first time. They saw the village for the first time. Colorful shabduli, local flower. Colorful shabduli, mud chullas, rippling brooks, wood piles for the fire, canoes and cattle, chicken and goats, fields and plows. Suddenly escaped the all-seeing parental eye. Suddenly escaped the all-seeing parental eye, got down into the nearest field, soft, slushy mud. They frolicked, played. Slushy, soft mud stuck on their feet. Seeing this, father roared, "Wash up outdoors." But it's the village soil. But it's the village soil. Once stuck to feet, won't come off easily. Still, father forcefully scrubbed and scrubbed, cleaned their feet. The children couldn't get sleep. Where they lay in bed at night, stealthily they brought their feet up to their noses, inhaled deeply of the village soil, and happily slumbered. And the original in Konkani. गांवची माती. तो आपल्या भुरग्याक घेऊन पहिलेच फावट अमेरिकेच्यान आपल्या गांवांत आयलो. तो आपल्या भुरग्याक घेऊन अमेरिकेच्यान पहिलेच फावट आपल्या गांवांत आयलो. ती पहिलेच फावट गांव पळयताली. रंगीत शब्दुली, मातयेच्यो चुली, रंगीत शब्दुली, मातयेच्यो चुली, खळखळपी व्हाळ, जळवाचो दाळ, तारवां आनी गोरवां, कुकडां आनी बोकडां, शेतां आनी जोतां. अचकीत आवय बापायची नदर चुकोवन ती नांगरिल्ल्या शेतांत देवली. मोव मोव मातयेंत नाचली खेळ्ळी, मोव मोव मातयेंत नाचली खेळ्ळी. चिकण चिकण माती पांयाक चिकटल्ली पळोवन बापूय आड्डलो. चिकण चिकण माती पांयाक चिकटल्ली पळोवन बापूय आड्डलो. भायरूच पांय धुवपाक लायले. पूण गांवची माती ती, पूण गांवची माती ती एकदां पांयाक लागतकीच बेगीन सुटना. एकदां पांयाक लागतकीच बेगीन सुटना. तरी बापायन घासून घासून पांय नितळ केलेच, तरी बापायन घासून घासून पांय नितळ केलेच. भुरग्यांक न्हीद पडना जाली, भुरग्यांक न्हीद पडना जाली. राती न्हिदिल्ले कडेन भुरग्यांनी ल्हवूच पांय नाका कडेन व्हरून वास घेतलो गांवच्या मातयेचो, वास घेतलो गांवच्या मातयेचो आनी तृप्त जावन न्हिदली, तृप्त जावन न्हिदली. देव बरें करूं.
Our next poet is Manohar Shetty. He has published 5 books of poems including Domestic Creatures. His new book is Body Language. In the UK, his poems have appeared in London Magazine, Poetry Review, Vasafiri and Poetry Wales. Several anthologies feature his work. He has edited Ferry Crossing, short stories from Goa, which is a standard text in colleges in Goa. His short stories have appeared in many journals. Manohar Shetty.
Good evening. I'll read some animal poems, or at least ostensibly they are about animals. Fireflies. Outside there were flashing streamers, but straying inside like wavering lanterns, into widening shadows thrown by excited nets of caps and blazers. We caged them in grass-crammed bottles, the tops punctured for air, and watched them stare like luminous dials. I had imagined burning crystals or tips of emerald embers, but found a softer substance, soon dimming. The insects worried by coarse hands, the walls of glass baffling their tiny wings, wilted to lifeless specks. I felt nothing then, only a small pang for the loss of a schoolboy's ornament. But now, traveling my daily groove, in the hunt for food and habitat, I remember their trapped blank lights. Second poem is called Domestic Creatures. It's a metaphor for the extended joint family. Domestic creatures. Lizard. Tense, wizened, wrinkled neck twisting, she clears the air of small aberrations with a snapping tongue, a long tongue. Pigeon. Swaddled cozily, he settles by the window, burping softly, eyelids half closed, head sinking in a fluffy, embroidered pillow. Spider. The swollen-headed spider spins yarns from her corner. Tenuous threads of her tails glitter like rays from the fingertips of a saint. She weaves on, plays along, hangs from a hoary strand, rolls, unrolls, a yo-yo, a jiggling asterisk, a footnote, little characters transfixed in the clutches of her folds. Cockroach. Open the lid, he tumbles out like a family secret, scuttles back into darkness, reappears, feelers like miniature periscopes, questioning the air, leaves telltale traces, wings flaky as withered onion skin, fresh specks scurrying in old crevices. The next poem is called Lice. That's L-I-C-E, lice. They scamper up the pathway of a parting, or crouch camouflaged in luxuriant surroundings. Raking fingernails will crush a few. Ablutions of oil, soap, shampoo flush out a legion. But clutching a slick ropeway of hair, one leaves behind nits, and about them all their wits. Dog it deep, it's an itch that invades both indigent and chic. Far or mop, pubes forced on pubes, skull against skull. Even in deodorized armpit, the vice of lice festers. Not even a tonsure will kill the pestilence. Beating the combing operation, frenzied escapees, wriggle on piled locks, bundle off for wigs. A few stray still in the hunt for a last strand in a gold locket. Also about another animal. It's called Survivor. My daughter works with this wildlife group, and she once brought a crocodile home to my house. It had been trapped in Kumbarjoa Canal. I had never seen a crocodile so close up. Survivor for Ria. My daughter brings the crocodile home. Its snout bound tight with rope, its buck teeth clenched. Untangled from a fisherman's net, it lies still on our strip of lawn. Its tail serrated as a saw, its height like chain mail. We stare back at its staring eye from our safe balconies. As my daughter and her team haul it like a palanquin into a purring pickup. Accustomed only to lost kittens and pups, we watch in suburban awe as they set off in a swirl of dust. For that remote river green with slime, at home to their captive and its kind, their ridged heads floating like islets, or sunning themselves on the banks where birds peck clean their yawning cavities, busy as dentists, and where they're out of reach from the stench of the tannery and those spotlit arcades of shoes, belts, wallets, and other accessories. I'll read two poems about Goa. The usual questions I'm asked when I've lived in Goa for 30 years. First thing they ask me is, that is what inspires your poetry. So it took me about more than 10 years before I wrote a poem about Goa. This one is called Taverna. After 20 years of yoga and mastery of its acrobatic asanas, forehead on the floor, feet down the neck, total breath control, he tripped over the doormat and died of cardiac arrest. All of 44. Clean living, as he put it once, is the path to nirvana. At the Good Luck Taverna, Eddie, 74, pours 3/4 of Caju Fenny, topped by a shot of Dator's brandy, down the hatch below a picture of Mother Mary, between sunset till the bar shuts at 12. He goes home on his moped without troubling the potholes or the pigs, and sleeps the sleep of the just. This is ritual the past 40 years, though every Christmas Doc warns him it's his last. I asked him once over a peg, boiled eggs, and a saucer of peanuts, the secret of his long life and sound health. He blinked behind his soda water bottle lenses and said, "Drink, siesta, and God bless." What for you is poison is for me tonic and medicine. Sun worshippers, Anjuna. Their eyes are invisible behind the sunglasses. Their walrus breasts resting apart like gunny sacks wear a hint of whiskers. At high noon they are back in the palm frond shack. They nurse a gin and tonic or a tepid beer as the bored waiters swat flies from the checked tablecloth. They lumber off for a last dip before sunset, turn on their bellies for an even tan. Their spread eagle legs are pink as hunks of ham hanging from hooks. In their rooms they shower off the sand and gel. They share a candlelit supper. They fly back home with a light shade of butterfly wings stamped on their buttocks. The last poem, please. Poem dedicated to all my fellow poets. Dreams. I envy them their perfect teeth, their flat bellies, the austerity with which they sip 2 small brandies and no more. They are not bores, and I have the highest regard for their gilt-edged securities, the bonds willed to their children, and the razor-edged crease of their trousers, their old-school ties, cufflinks, and blazers. I envy them their poise and prudence, and sometimes I wish I could be like them, secure in their self-confidence. But I've long forfeited such dreams for a belief in trees that speak at night, for the tall grass that droops in grief, for tides that pine for the moon, for whales that sing in perfect chorus, for the symbiotic creeper, for caterpillars transformed into butterflies, for tigers that have earned their stripes, for salamanders pulsing in a distant planet, for the stars that will one day be peopled and the sun darkens. Thank you.
Our next poet is Sridhala Swami. Sridhala is a poet, photographer and critic. Her first collection of poems, A Reluctant Survivor, was published by the Sahitya Academy in 2007. A second collection, Escape Artist, is forthcoming. Swami is currently writer-in-residence at the International Writing Program at the University of Iowa. She blogs at The Spaniard in the Works.
Slip dreams. One night his words slip under my dreams and haunt me when I'm awake. I know who you are. I have found you out. For several nights after that one, I clothe my dreams with nightmares. He is a vulture in repose. Evening comes and he watches me. I show signs of failing. I fall asleep as I must. Once my dream begins, he enters dark as feathers and as dry and rasping. If I ever had a face, it is covered now with his knowledge, with his eyes that say, I see you as you really are. What am I want to ask. But I am afraid as much of knowing the answer in dreams as of forgetting it when I wake. Who are you? I ask instead. He is a vulture awake. He devours me with his words. The more he speaks, the less I am. I would like to say that I am picked clean, but there is always the next night, and the next, and the next, and the next. Cryogenic. Let's suppose it is the man who waits for the woman to return. Let's assume it's been 20 years or 30. In all that time, through all upheavals and sorrows and who knows, perhaps a few joys, he holds himself ready for the moment when she will return. While she goes on large adventures and becomes lined with life, he is waiting for her. He is perfect and cold. One day, triumphant, she returns, expecting to find many things changed, but some things at least just as they were. As with Odysseus, she thinks she will know him by his old scars and learn about him by his new ones. But in the 20 or 30 years that she has been away, the world has left no mark on him. Nothing acquired, nothing changed. He is just as she had left him. Perfectly preserved, he knows nothing. What can he tell her about truth or reconciliation? This is another poem about waiting, but in a different way. Path tells the story wrong. If you want definitions, here's one. A lover is she who waits. The next part, the part where definitions are unwoven and the thread laid bare, can be left to Barthes, Roland, who said everything about it that needs to be said. And for what cannot be, and there are still some of those things, there are films which, no matter what the structuralists say, are not to be read. There was a girl who sat every evening at a particular table, hoping it was close enough to where the boys sat to make it appear a natural veering off when, if he came to sit at it, opposite her, but not close enough to make her seem desperate.
Not always was her waiting played out as gestures of solitude. Other people gave her company. There was nothing in her face that could be read as signs of biding. This did not mean that she knew her time was up. This did not mean that she ceased to wonder and hope and despair and curse. This is where Bath got the story of the Mandarin wrong, the one who pined for the courtesan who had said that after the 100th night of waiting, she would be his. What the courtesan did was to tell him what he wanted to know. She would be his, but did not tell him when she would be happy to put an end to his austerities. So he waited night after night, and on the night of the very day she had made up her mind to tell him he'd waited enough, he decided his penances were futile and slept in, and instead, she waited. Vertical smile. I'm smiling at you. A vertical smile. Dark, like nothing you've ever seen. Smile back, please. Sing into my mouth. Draw out my breath as you would ribbons, sliding it between your fingers. Tie me to you. Tie you to me. Now breathe. Stay this way. Hold the smile between your lips until it is no longer a gesture, but a memory lodged in blood and bone. Recall in later years these hours when more than blood called, when what gave answer was something we could not name. Then forget all this, because this is a vertiginous fall. Step back from the brink, now. Anaphorisms on love. When he leaves, she is condensed by shock until, like a seed, she becomes the original of herself. For her, it was hard to be in love again. It put her under serious pleasure. He was irresistible as only the very young of any species are programmed to be. He played enthusiasm like an extreme sport. No, he did not play. He imagined. The two things are different only because of outcomes. Somewhere outside this paradise, which is after all nothing but an enclosed garden, are places where outcomes are not surrounded by walls. She wonders what to call the things that are placed in paradise. She considers inoculating herself against future shock by administering small daily doses of loss. Against her better judgment, she finds she has become a hoarder. He also was a hoarder, but a stealthier one. What he hoarded and where he stored it are enduring secrets. It was always difficult to say they. It is a word that did not come easily to either of their tongues. But that is not why she left, why he left. That was an act of superb, of beautiful disentanglement. She condenses. He deliquesces. Incoherence and silence are not the same thing. Hoarding and holding are not the same thing. Thank you.
Our next poet is Dr. Geev Patel. He's a writer and a painter. He has published 3 books of verse, poems, How Do You Withstand Body, and Mirrored Mirroring. He has written 3 plays, Princes, Shavaksha, and Mr. Behram. Geev Patel.
I worked as a general practitioner of medicine for 35 years of my life. And I'm going to begin this reading with 3 short poems which were written right in the beginning of my career when I was a freshly graduated doctor working in hospital. And so, very vulnerable to things I saw there. The first poem is called Catholic Mother, and it is subtitled Your Child at Hospital. She's the youngest of 3, you said. She's always been so, sickly. And you smiled. The child responded, but turned shyly away. We were all 3 barely perturbed. And so you were trustful, open, not alien to objects, touching cups, bottles, her hair, shared by the sunlight that was breaking over the weeds, and peaceful that your child was breathing in the quiet afternoon dazzle. But then when it struck, when her eyes began to paper and drugs were ineffective, the room recoiled, and I saw you become private. Or relations could come to join into your pain. I can see that your people have more right to you now than I. Aunts and uncles will be closer. But before I let you leave, pious woman, you're weeping soft, unrebellious. From what perverseness do I oppose for you your simple, original trust before the present horror? This poem is called Old Man's Death. There may be a very small comfort in knowing yourself finally useless, when even grandchildren have grown beyond your love, and your would-be widow has out-hobbled you and won't be around to break with 1 or 2 of her last thick tears. And you not caring much for your fellow men, the doctors won't get your body. To know how simply you will be bundled away, startling a lifelong friend who finds he cannot mourn at the quick and easy changes. A sprinkling of water, the disappearance of an odor, a turn of bed sheets, leaving a bed, a chair, perhaps a whole room with clarity in them. Postmortem. It is startling to see how swiftly a man may be sliced from chin to prick. How easily the bones he has felt whole under his chest for 60, 70 years may be snapped, with what calm liver, lung, and heart be examined. The bowels noted for defect, the brain for hemorrhage, and all these insights that have for a lifetime raged and strained to understand be dumped back into the body, now stitched to perfection, before announcing death due to an obscure reason. This is a later poem. It's called Squirrels in Washington. And it's about the distance that all living things have to maintain from each other, and the sorrow of that. And it also mentions Daphne, who in Greek mythology is a forest nymph, who Apollo desired, and she was not interested in him, and he tries to rape her, and she prays to the forest gods, and she's saved, but her saving is that she's been converted into a tree. So I thought that she's right for this poem because she envelops two existences of woman and tree, whereas most of us have to keep all our existences separate. And what happens when existences merge? Squirrels in Washington. Squirrels in Washington come galloping at you on fours, then break to halt a few feet away and beg on hind quarters. No one stones them, and their fear is diminished. They do halt, even so, some feet away. Those few feet, the object of my wonder. Do I emit currents at closer quarters? Are those the few feet I would keep from a tame tiger? Is there a hierarchy then of distances that must be observed? And non-observance would at once agglutinate all of nature into a messy, inextricable mass. Ah, Daphne, passing from woman to foliage, did she for a moment sense all vegetable sap as current of her own bloodstream, the green flooding into the red? And when she achieved her final arboreal being, shed dewy tears each dawn for that lost, fleeting moment, that hint at freedom in transit between cage and cage. Two short poems. These are translations I'm working on. 17th, 18th century Gujarati mystic poet Akho. Here are two aspects of Maya that he talks about. In the first one, he talks about Maya at her most ferocious and the object on which her fury is turned. And in the second, Akho, the teacher, tells you how to deal with Maya, and it is a more quiet, compassionate poem. The dude, bathed, scrubbed, perfumed, tucking in eats till he bloats stud size, battening on each pleasure on earth, a germ of Maya sits concealed in that bulk. This carcass believes Maya to be his friend, but Maya will chew him down to his entrails. And here's Akho, the teacher. Confront her head on. You can't evade Maya. Then rest, carefree. Before death says, Fini, die to the world. What remains is Hari. Akha says, whatever you do will be Maya.
So don't fret. Don't look away. Would the night vanish if you run from it?
Our next poet is Ranjit Hoskote. He is a poet, cultural theorist and curator. He is the author of more than 20 books ranging across poetry, art criticism, cultural history and poetry in translation. He has been awarded the Sanskriti Award for Literature, the S.H. Raza Award for Literature, the Sahitya Academy Golden Jubilee Award for Literature, and has curated more than 20 exhibitions of contemporary art, including the 7th Gwangju Biennale. Ranjit Hoskote.
Okay, thanks Jerry for those words of welcome. How did all of you survive? The light here is exceedingly multiple. I'll begin with a poem called Ghalib in the Winter of the Great Revolt. It's set in Delhi in 1857. It was the end of the Great Uprising, the Mutiny, as it was called in colonial records, and refers to what happens to a poet who also happens to be involved in politics. The divided allegiances of being a poet in turbulent times is more or less my question here. The emperor's murdered grandsons hang from the gate of peace like hushed bells, and rifles drill the sentenced air. My neighbor, the flautist, slit his veins last night, burning his prayer book before he died, true to a god of subtle tones, wasted on the deaf. Ghalib writes to a friend, all around us the Furies ride their burning horses. It's as though Taimur had broken Delhi's walls again, his cinder-streaked soldiers heaping pyramids of skulls in the streets, and a baker's for orphans to compute the profits of betrayal, the penalties of defeat. Cannon, the only thunder, writes Ghalib, and no rain. Gunners waving St. George's flag have driven the nobles from their charred mansions, tethered the peasants to the surly river. The coppersmith, tapping at a dead branch, fills the vacant sky with the privacy of his grief. The friend with a spy at his shoulder writes back, when did you become a poet of adjectives, roosting in the rafters of a broken house? Ghalib, the owl must hide in the tamarind for now, but the genies of havoc will go on furlough soon. You say your inkwell is empty, but your dry quill still claws at the fibers of the heart. A pharmacist may drug himself with lyric, Ghalib replies, and a tiger may vanish in the rainforest of his hunter's dreams. But the dry quill is a reproach, and this raw winter could be the living tomb of my song. Send paper, friend. These are the last pages of my journal I'm writing on. This one's called The Editor's Last Nightmare. And as it goes on, you will see that it also lets go of syntax a little bit. So bear with me as I read. Towards the end, he stopped trying to edit the footage that unscrolled in his mind, the tape playing over and over, headphones blurred with calls, a shrine guerrillas ramming the gate's footfalls, blowing up in the mind darkness, first light crouching over tents, a trail of scattered boots, the lens pulled back, to frame scorched pilgrims huddling, watchful as pigeons in their alcoves. Tear this night off me, as a surgeon would strip the sweat-soaked shirt off a wounded man. Someone's printed his palms on my door, javelins guard my bed, and whose are those bodies, driven into sand, scooped up with mud guards, and this horse, its neck dripping blood on my sheets? Give me plain song, not reportage, he cried, locked up in a prison of rumors. Landscapes with Saints, which are 7 portraits of mystics, really, because it occurred to me that the only way to approach the mystic is perhaps through reimagining the conditions of what it means to be a renouncer, and to try and present that in the form of invented narratives. There's 7 of these. Landscapes with Saints. Mean as knives, his burnished limbs rotted and stank when the gateman came to call his number. Gorakh forgot his body was just a borrowed suit, 1 size too large. He's forgotten the river pilot's song. He's above parrot gossip, beyond the hawk's warning cry. Wrapping himself in the torn fabric of sky, Kabir climbs on. Dropping his nimbus in the grass, he looks at the boats riding the stream below, close enough to touch. When the road ends, Tukka takes a deep breath and leaps. She sees a boatman rowing in sand, shielding his skiff from the ocean's roar. Such a safe harbor, brother, sings Lalla. It saves you the trouble of charting your course. His eyes would not rest on a quatrain of walls and scan the desert air instead. Mango trees balancing on their heads. Himself, Khushru, a bird of paradise, judged by earth. Neglect leafs through his pages. Perfumes escape from files left unstoppered on his shelves. Lead crumbles in Attar's mind. His hands, wherever they rest, touch gold. A torn cotton robe against the wind. His limbs nettle-pricked, transparent as prayers. His name burnt out, Milarepa sings to himself as he travels the centuries. And I'll end with I'll end with a brief selection of poems translated from the original Kashmiri of Lalla or Lal Ded, the 14th century Kashmiri mystic. And by way of preface, I just want to say that when you belong, as I do, to an ethnic micro-minority which has undergone several experiences of diaspora, there's no simple way to answer that great Indian question, where do you come from? So on the one hand, it saves you from sitting quietly in linguistic and regional boxes that other people are eager to draw for you. And on the other side, what it does is it allows you access to various phases of your inherited history. And in my case, my particular project, if you will, of reappropriating that past was to return to a figure who's been very, very significant to me and a corpus of poetry, which is the poetry of Lalla. So I'm going to read a few of these varks in translation. Begin with one that I like very much indeed. I'm towing, meaning I like the vark in the original, whether you like the translation or not is your prerogative. I'm towing my boat across the ocean with a thread. Will he hear me and help me across? Or am I seeping away like water? Am I kind of in and out of the mic?
Address it more into the mic.
Okay. I'm towing my boat across the ocean with a thread. Will he hear me and help me across? Or am I seeping away like water from a half-baked cup? Wonder, my poor soul, you're not going home anytime soon. I trapped my breath.
Ranjit, 1 second.
Yeah.
You mic.
Thank you. Some of these varks refer, of course, as many of you are aware, to yogic or tantric practices, and this is one of them. But the annotation comes later. I think the poem itself seizes you with its images. I trapped my breath in the bellows of my throat. A lamp blazed up inside showed me who I really was. I crossed the darkness holding fast to that lamp, scattering its light seeds around me as I went. Whatever I've started, I'll finish, but the accounts are someone else's headache. Keep the reward. Whatever I do is an offering to the self. Wherever I go, my only burden is lightness of step. Resilience to stand in the path of lightning. Resilience to walk when darkness falls at noon. Resilience to grind yourself fine in the turning mill. Resilience will come to you. And I'll close with this one, which speaks of the nature of a quester who was also an autodidact, someone who taught herself as she went. What the books taught me, I've practiced. What they didn't teach me, I've taught myself. I've gone into the forest and wrestled with the lion. I didn't get this far by teaching one thing and doing another. Thank you.
Our next poet is Arvind Krishna Mehrotra. He is the author of 4 books of poetry, the editor of the Oxford India Anthology of 12 Modern Indian Poets, and a history of Indian literature in English. He is the translator of The Absent Traveller, Prakrit Love Poetry, which you heard him talk about in the morning, if you were fortunate enough to attend the translation panel. Arvind Krishna Mehrotra.
Well, 2 of our poets have read Bhakti poetry. Unfortunately, I don't have my Kabir, but if anyone has my Kabir, I would like to read. Oh, you have the Kabir. Can I borrow a copy for a minute? Does anyone have the Kabir?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, no, Kabir. I was not thinking of, I was not thinking of reading from Kabir, which is, I didn't bring the book. But I thought I'd read 1 or 2 just to show you how different these Indian Bhakti poets are and how they, to tonsured monks and dreadlocked Rastas, to idol worshippers and idol smashers, to fasting Jains and feasting Shaivites, to Vedic Pandits and Faber poets, the weaver Kabir sends one message. The news of death hangs over all. Only Ram's name can save you. Say it now. Well, he says, when Kabir says Ram, he doesn't mean the Ram, he doesn't mean the Hindu god Ram at all. He just means this god called Ram. Oh Pandit, your hair splitting's so much bullshit. I'm surprised you still get away with it. If parroting the name of Ram brought salvation, then saying sugarcane should sweeten the mouth, saying fire burn the feet, saying water slake thirst, and saying food would be as good as a belch. If saying money made everyone rich, there'd be no beggar in the streets. My back is turned on the world. You hear me singing of Ram and you smile. One day, Kabir says, all bundled up will be delivered to Deathville. Now, whenever he's referring to the Muslims, Kabir uses the word Turk. Were the Creator concerned about caste, we'd arrive in the world with a caste mark on the forehead. If you say you are a Brahmin, born of a mother who is a Brahmin, was there a special canal through which you were born? And if you say you are a Turk and your mother's a Turk, why weren't you circumcised before birth? Nobody's lower caste. The lower castes are everywhere. They are the ones who don't have Ram on their lips, Kabir says. Actually, he's as blunt as I tell it. Jetu Turakani Jaya to bhitari khatana kyun na karaya. I'm not making this up. A lot of the time, because of the tone, people think I'm making up all this, the Kabir, but I'm not making up anything in this, apart from the language, which I've just changed a bit. Running up minarets, calling out to the faithful 5 times a day. What's your problem, Muezzin? Can't you see you are a walking mosque yourself? Your mind's your Mecca, your body the Kaaba that you face when you pray. Anything you say is an utterance from heaven. Cut the throat of desire, not a poor goat's if you must. Kabir says, I am possessed. Just don't ask me how it happened or when. I think that's I was reading some of the Prakrit poems, and I'll just read 2 or 3 just to give you, some idea of what Indian sexuality was like 2,500 years ago. This is about sexual fantasies. All these poems are spoken by women. I'll just read 1 or 2. Let faithful wives say what they like. I don't sleep with my husband, even when I do. It happens so fast, these poems, that I'm saying, before you know what's going on, before you know what's happened, she's already said what she had to say. This is another woman telling her friend, he finds the missionary position tiresome and grows suspicious if I suggest another. Friend, what's the way out? There are any number of poems in the Gahakoso or the Gata Sapshati of Satvahan Hal, which are about older women and younger men, or boys sometimes. It's sexuality in old age. But this is an older woman, and she's obviously going to sleep with a much younger person. And she says, he groped me for the underwear that wasn't there. She removed her underwear, obviously. So he groped me for the underwear that wasn't there. I saw the boy's fluster and embraced him more tightly. And then the last one. This is, any number of poems are about the woman on top position. And this is one of the few poems, very few poems, in which the man is the speaker. And the man is telling the woman that now that she's played the man in lovemaking, she knows what happens. Hair like ruffed feathers, half-open eyes, the body in tremors needing rest. Having played the man, you now know how we suffer. Anyway, I'll just read a couple of my own poems, and then Yunus can. One of the characters I'm most fascinated with in Indian history is Mahmud Ghazni. He came here 30 times or 25 times, exactly 1,000 years ago. He died in 1030, and sort of we are in 2013, so 1013 would be around the time Ghazni wandering North India. The poem is titled A Hindu Panegyrist Remembers Sultan Mahmud. This is said by a Hindu panegyrist in Ghazna, and it's so Ghazna 1030. The wasting disease was bad enough, then he started losing his mind. Visiting the treasury the week he died, his jewels on display, he broke down and wept like a child. Newcomers won't believe it, but Ghazna used to be a miserable little place, known only for the sweetness of its melons, before he changed its face, gave it a skyline to match Baghdad's. He also changed our lives. Each year before the onset of winter, he'd set off on his Indian campaign, and 4 months later, when he returned in the spring, the camel trains carrying the spoils of war took a day and a night to go past my door. We sang his praises. He didn't stint on the reward. Gold mostly, but sometimes a string of pearls or a silk robe like the one I'm wearing. Thank you.
We started with a Konkani poet, and we're going to end with an English poet, whose roots are in Goa. Eunice D'Souza taught English literature at St. Xavier's College for over 30 years and retired as head of department. Her collected poems, A Necklace of Skulls, was published by Penguin in 2010. Penguin has also published These My Words, the Penguin Anthology of Indian Poetry, edited by Eunice D'Souza and Melanie Salgado. Her poems have been published in Portuguese, Finnish, Italian, and Swedish. Eunice D'Souza.
Thank you, Jerry. I'm going to begin with a poem called The Road, which sort of compresses childhood and adult experience. the road. As we came out of the church into the sunlight, a row of small girls in First Communion dresses, I felt the occasion demanded lofty thoughts. I remember only my grandmother smiling at me. They said, now she wears lipstick, now she's a Bombay girl. They said, your mother is lonely. Nobody said, even the young must live. In school, I clutched Sister Flora's skirt and cried for my mother, who taught across the road. Sister Flora is dead. The school is still standing. I am still learning to cross the road. The next one's called Unfinished Poem. As a teacher, anyone whose teachers will know that some student will come with his or her work and want a comment. So here's my answer to one such. Unfinished poem. I found your unfinished poem. There's a sun in the sky, and you are near me, and all should be right with the world. But something hasn't set, and it had better not be the sun. I could pinch a line from Neruda for you. This is a quote. I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees. There you have it, the apparent ease of love and poetry. A nasty one now, but written in London, not in Donabar. It's from 5 London pieces. It's the third one. Meeting poets. Meeting poets, I'm disconcerted sometimes by the color of their socks, the suspicion of a wig, the wasp in the voice, and an air sometimes of dankness. Best to meet in poems. Cool, speckled shells in which one hears a sad but distant sea. Okay. A poem, as we're in Goa, it's called Idyll. It's a little poem about my grandfather's pining for pre-liberation Goa. When Goa was Goa, my grandfather says, the bandits came over the mountain to our village, only to splash in cool springs and visit Our Lady's chapel. Old ladies were safe among their bags of rice and chilies, unperturbed when souls restless in purgatory stoned roofs to ask for prayers. Even the snakes bit only to break the monotony. It's a poem called Reprieve, it's a small one. A friend, confided in me about all sorts of things and then was very embarrassed as we sometimes are. Reprieve. This poem is for you. It's a reprieve. It says nothing in your little black heart can frighten me. I've looked too long into my own. Thank you for the gift of your uncertainties. Mid-sentence, it's about a friend who visited me, one day, and next day I heard he was dead. Mid-sentence. You left mid-sentence. Exam house, you said, that degree certificate. I watched you turn the corner of the house, wave, say you'd ring Sunday. That was it. Finis. Kaput. Dead. Where you are, there's neither harp nor halo, nor what you preferred, an endless ashen dawn beyond the reach of the sun. It was thoughtless to vanish so suddenly. Thank you.
Mridula Garg, noted Hindi writer, will now read To the Glacier, a short piece in poetic prose.
To the glacier. She came to a mountain stream and stood staring at it, furious flow, mad like the wind, born of the mutual attraction of the sun and the snow. Can you hear me?
Pull it down a bit. Pull it down a bit.
She came to a mountain stream and stood staring at its furious flow, mad like the wind, born of the mutual attraction of the sun and the snow. She had only to stand in the chest-deep water, and the river would do the rest. The toughest boulder would not save her, once its swirling rush pulled away the ground beneath her. She closed her eyes to think better. Everything merged together. The water, the boulders, the sun rays, and the wandering pathway. Round and round they went, making her dizzy. Holding her head in her hands, she sank on the grassy bank. The river roared with derisive laughter. Coward, enamored of the earth, afraid to experiment, don't you want to go across? Across, across, across. She opened her eyes and saw the narrow bridge of snow on the river like a saddle on a wild horse. Let the water laugh. She would go across riding on the snow. See, I am the tease now, you mad, flighty river. Hey, where to? The voice was like a whiplash. Was the water objecting, or had she angered the snow bridge? No one was in sight. She took another step. Where to, girl? She looked around more carefully. On her right was a steep incline of snow. On the top grew a lone tall tree, taller than the pine. A mountain people, perhaps. She walked on. Was it a tree or a figure sculpted out of snow, touched with all the colors the setting sun could command with its last frantic grasp at life? Where were you going? She heard it say distinctly as she came closer and realized with a gasp it was not a sculpture. Over the snow bridge, across, she stammered. Laughing delightedly, he took her hand and pulled her across at a swift run. They had taken but 4 steps when she felt her feet leave the snow and falter in the air. But his lusty laughter held her aloft. She had heard the snow bridge break with a thump. She had choked on her scream and produced an identical sound, thump, that the vagabond laughter had claimed as its own. Glaciers, she said. Where is the glacier? Come, I'll show you. A steep climb, a sharp curve, a long run, and he was still again. Before him was a frozen waterfall, rushing water stopping midway, petrified. Glacier, she whispered. Come, he said again. She held his hand and clambered up, weighed with fatigue. On the top, he turned the sledge round and asked her to sit behind him. She did, embracing him with her arms and her legs. Zoom they went, hurtling down with speed fed on passion, velocity that lay the wind low. Again and again and again, till the saffron field began to bloom on the snow. The flower glowed in color after color, purple, orange, violet, yellow, orange, purple, yellow, violet, purple, orange, violet. So many seasons had passed. She understood everything. The amorous philandering of the wind, her effervescent unreasonableness, the oneness with the elements. Her companion was the angel of death. No human being could be that enchanting or confound one so completely. She decided to jump the next time the sledge hurtled down. Hands grew numb. His shoulders slipped out of reach. Sleep claimed her legs. The decision was taken out of her hands. She was the snow. Eternally grateful to the angel of death for the incomparable taste of life it had given her. What better death than to die grateful?
Thank you very much. You proved yourself an audience worthy of as much applause as the poets.